It began with something so small I almost didn't notice it. One of those harmless little things we tell ourselves doesn't matter, a white lie meant to smooth the edges of a situation. At the time, I didn't think much of it. In fact, I convinced myself it was for the best. The truth would have been sharper, heavier, maybe even cruel. The lie, on the other hand, slipped off my tongue like silk, neat and painless. I remember it clearly. A friend had been trying hard at something, pouring effort into a project that I knew, deep down, wasn't very good. It was clumsy, unpolished, the sort of thing you could smile at politely but never really admire. When they asked me what I thought, there was a pause just long enough for the truth to consider escaping. But then, just as quickly, I shut it down and said something else entirely. I said it was wonderful. I said I was impressed. I told them I admired the dedication, the effort, the spark of creativity. I wrapped it up in words of encouragement, the kind that made their eyes light up, that made their shoulders straighten with pride. And in that moment, I felt strangely powerful. Not because I had fooled them, but because I had given them something to hold on to. They walked away smiling, believing in themselves just a little more, carrying a confidence they didn't have before. I thought about it later, about the choice I had made. Was it dishonest? Yes, technically. But it wasn't the kind of dishonesty that broke trust or caused harm. It was a cushion placed beneath a fall, a softness added where reality might have been too sharp. What surprised me most was what happened after. My friend didn't stop. Instead, they kept working. They practiced more, tried harder, refined their craft, and little by little, their work began to improve. The same project that had once looked clumsy began to take shape, and the next one after that was even better. They began to shine. Not because they were spared the truth, but because the small lie gave them room to grow into it. I started noticing moments like that everywhere. A colleague nervous before a presentation, asking me if they seemed prepared. Did I see the shaking hands? Of course. Did I see the uneven pacing of their words? Yes. But I also saw the hours they had put into their notes, the effort they had carved out late at night, the determination in their tired eyes. So I said what they needed to hear. You've got this. You're ready. And afterward, when they stood in front of the room and delivered with a confidence they didn't know they had, I realized that sometimes the truth isn't what helps people most. Sometimes it's the faith we lend them until they find their own. The more I leaned into it, the more I began to see myself change. I had always thought of honesty as the highest virtue, that telling the truth was the ultimate form of respect. And I still believe in honesty, but I learned that there are truths that cut too soon, too harshly, and they don't always build people up. They can tear them down before they even have a chance to grow. A white lie, carefully placed, was not about deception. It was about kindness, about giving someone the space to believe in themselves until they were strong enough to face the truth and rise above it. But it wasn't just about others. I started telling myself white lies too. On mornings when the mirror seemed unkind, when failures felt like they defined me, I'd whisper to myself, "You're doing fine. You're getting better. You can handle this." Were those words always true? Maybe not in the strictest sense. But in speaking them, I began to act as if they were, and in acting, I began to make them real. The lie wasn't a mask, it was a bridge, carrying me over the moments when doubt was too heavy. I never set out to live dishonestly, and I don't. But I began to understand the difference between a lie that destroys and a lie that protects, between a falsehood that misleads and one that encourages. The truth has its time, and when that time comes, it should be faced. But the small cheats we allow ourselves, the soft reassurances, the gentle white lies, can sometimes be the very thing that makes truth possible later on. Looking back now, I realize the irony. The cheat that was supposed to bend reality in someone's favor ended up bending me instead, shaping me into someone more patient, more compassionate, more willing to understand that people don't always need hard facts, they need hope. And in giving them that, I found that I, too, became a better person. It started with something that seemed insignificant, almost laughably small, the kind of moment most people would forget by the next day. But I remember it. I remember it because it was the first time I realized the strange power of a white lie, not as a tool to manipulate, but as a way to soften life's edges. I was younger then, and I carried honesty like a shield. I thought truth was everything. I believed it was the one thing people owed each other, unpolished, raw, unkind if necessary. Better to be hurt by the truth than comforted by a lie, I used to say, convinced it made me wise. And then came the day that philosophy was tested. A friend, full of nervous energy, had been working on a painting for weeks. I knew they weren't particularly skilled. Art wasn't their strength. But when they finally showed me the finished piece, their eyes sparkled with hope, with a desperate need for approval. The painting itself was awkward, colors clashed, shapes leaned wrong, proportions were lost. My mouth opened to tell the truth. I almost said it, it's not very good. But something inside me stopped. I saw the way their hands gripped the canvas, the way their voice trembled as they asked, "What do you think?" And instead of truth, I let something else slip through my lips. "It's beautiful," I said. "Really beautiful. You should be proud." Their relief was instant. Shoulders relaxed, eyes softened, and a smile broke across their face like sunlight. They believed me. And in that belief, I saw something unexpected. They weren't satisfied. They were encouraged. They didn't quit painting. They tried harder. And little by little they got better. That clumsy painting was the seed of something greater, something my honest words might have killed before it even sprouted. That was the first time I understood. The truth can be sharp, too sharp for people who are still learning, still building, still fragile. A white lie, though, placed carefully, could be a kindness, a hand steadying someone who might otherwise fall. As the years passed, I saw this lesson repeat itself in new shapes. A coworker trembling before a big presentation asked me, "Do I look nervous?" They did. Their hands shook, their voice cracked, their pacing was uneven. But I didn't tell them that. I told them, "You look confident. You're ready for this." And something extraordinary happened. They walked into that room with their head high, and they delivered. Maybe not perfectly, but better than they would have if I had handed them the truth about their nervousness. My lie gave them strength they hadn't found in themselves yet. Slowly, I began to realize I was changing. I was still honest, but I had learned to be gentle. I no longer believed truth was about blurting facts in the coldest way possible. Truth could wait. It could arrive later, when someone was strong enough to face it. In the meantime, a lie could act as a bridge, thin, fragile, but enough to carry someone across a dark moment. And then one day, I turned the same cheat on myself. There was a morning I woke up feeling like a failure. Everything I had tried recently seemed to have fallen apart. I stared into the mirror and saw someone tired, someone behind in life, someone not good enough. That was the truth, or at least, that's what it felt like. But I remembered those lies I had told others, the ones that lifted them instead of tearing them down. So, I whispered to my own reflection, "You're fine. You're strong. You're improving. You'll get there." None of it felt true in that moment, not even a little. But saying it out loud gave me just enough strength to move forward. And as days turned into weeks and weeks into months, I realized something stunning. I had grown into those words. The lie had become the truth. That was the strangest discovery of all, that white lies, spoken with care, could shape reality itself. They weren't just masks. They were seeds. Tell someone they're capable often enough, and one day they will be. Tell yourself you're getting better often enough, and eventually, you'll see the proof. Of course, I still believe in truth. There are moments when honesty is essential, when illusions must be stripped away so growth can happen. But I no longer worship truth as the only virtue. I've learned there is another kind of virtue in kindness, in compassion, in knowing when not to say the thing that will crush someone who isn't ready to carry it yet. The classic cheat of a white lie didn't make me a worse person. It made me softer. It made me gentler. It made me better. Because in protecting others, in encouraging them, in giving them faith when their own was fragile, I discovered something powerful. Lies can hurt, yes, but they can also heal. And when wielded with care, they can even make the liar, me, a better human being. It began when I was a child, though I didn't understand it at the time. I was maybe 8 or 9, sitting at the kitchen table with a drawing I had made in a cheap notebook. I remember the colors were messy, my lines crooked, the whole thing more a tangle of scribbles than a real picture. I showed it to my mother, full of pride, expecting her to see what I saw. She looked at it, tilted her head, and smiled. "It's wonderful," she said. "You're so talented." I believed her. For weeks afterward, I filled notebook after notebook with more drawings. I showed them to anyone who would look. Only later, much later, did I realize she must have known the truth. My art was ordinary, childish at best. But the lie, her small, gentle lie, ignited something in me that truth would have crushed. And for a time, I believed I was an artist. I carried that faith into school, where teachers were less gentle. A blunt remark from one of them about my handwriting or the unevenness of a sketch could sting for days. But by then I had already learned from my mother's lie the power of believing in possibility, and so I kept trying. That was the first seed, the idea that sometimes what people need most isn't the unpolished truth, but the encouragement to keep going. Years later, in high school, I found myself on the other side of the same moment. A classmate, shy and awkward, wrote poems and would nervously hand them to me to read. The poems were clumsy, tangled with cliches, full of heavy metaphors that fell flat. I remember staring at one of them in the dim light of the library, trying to decide what to say. The honest words rose first. "This isn't very good." But then I remembered the kitchen table, the smile of my mother, the warmth of that lie. So I said, "This is beautiful. You've really got something here." The effect was instant. My classmate lit up, his voice stronger, his shoulders lifted. And like my mother's lie to me, my own words fueled him forward. He wrote more, shared more, and though he never became a great poet, he became braver. And in a way, that was better. When I stepped into adulthood, the white life followed me quietly, slipping into my relationships, my work, my daily life. I told a nervous girlfriend. She looked radiant when I could see she'd been crying. I told a struggling friend that their job interview had gone better than they thought, even though the doubt was written across the faces of the panel. I told myself, in the lonely hours after failure, that I was stronger than I felt, that I would recover, that I wasn't finished yet. And each time, I found something remarkable. The lie was never the end. It was the beginning. It didn't stand alone, it opened a door. The girlfriend eventually saw her own beauty in the mirror again. The friend got another job interview and walked in with more confidence than before. And me? I survived my failures. Not because the white lies I told myself were true in the moment, but because I lived into them until they became true. Not every lie was perfect. There were times when it backfired, when someone later discovered that I hadn't been entirely honest. But even then, I noticed that the sting faded quickly compared to the lasting effect of the hope I'd given. The damage of a small falsehood, spoken kindly, was far lighter than the damage of a truth spoken too harshly, too soon. I remember one colleague in particular. He was new, young, and desperate to prove himself. His reports were sloppy, his presentations rushed, his work full of mistakes. Everyone knew it. He came to me late one evening, shoulders slumped, and asked in a voice barely above a whisper, "Do you think I belong here?" The truth was ready on my tongue.
No, not yet.
Not with this quality of work. But I looked at his tired eyes, the way he was already carrying the weight of self-doubt, and I chose differently. "You belong here," I said. "You just need time." I will never forget the way he exhaled, as though someone had handed him air after he had been drowning. He stayed, he worked, and in the months that followed, he grew into his role. My lie had bought him the courage to stay long enough for the truth to catch up. And so, as I grew older, I stopped thinking of it as lying in the cruel sense of the word. I began to think of it as lending. Lending someone belief. Lending them strength. Lending them a vision of themselves they couldn't yet see. But the moment that sealed it for me wasn't about friends or colleagues or family. It was about myself. There was a night I sat alone in my apartment, the weight of failure heavy on my chest. I had lost something important, an opportunity, a chance I had been working toward for years. The truth was simple. I wasn't good enough. That was the fact staring back at me. And for the first time in my life, I understood why people give up, why they stop trying. But in that darkness, I remembered all the little lies I had given to others. I remembered the way they had smiled, the way they had found courage in words that weren't entirely true. And so I did the same for myself. I whispered into the silence, "You're going to be okay. You're stronger than this. This failure isn't the end. It's just the beginning of something else." None of it felt true. Not then. But the next morning I woke up and carried those words like armor. I kept going. And eventually, impossibly, those words came true. Looking back now, I see the pattern clearly. The white lies that shaped me were never about deception. They were about mercy. They were about hope. They were about giving people, including myself, the chance to become more than they were in that fragile moment. The classic cheat of a white lie didn't make me dishonest. It made me human. And, in ways I never expected, it made me better.